Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. We appreciate it. In this series, again, we talk to another one of the movers and shakers of the real estate appraisal business in the United States, Miss Pam Teal. Now, Pam brings a great wealth of experience. She has been doing this a long time, not trying to give away her age. She started when she was 10. And she is a USPAP instructor, although she's not representing the ASB here. She is one of the mentors for the state of Texas for those appraisers who find themselves on the wrong side of the Texas Appraisal Board, although she is not here in that capacity. She is currently a member of the National Board of Directors of the National Association of Appraisers, although she is not here in that capacity. She is here as an educator, a teacher, someone who is dynamically interested in real estate appraisal and real estate appraisers. So, Pam, I hope I haven't left anything out. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. And as always, Tim, you're being so gracious in your introduction of me. I am honored to be here. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Well, I say it only because it's true. It just is a matter of simple fact. So, Pam, both of us are USPAP instructors. Both of us have been involved in education, real estate appraisal education, for a long time. Both of us have written classes. Both of us are recognized subject matter experts. So we know a little bit about appraisal, and we know a little bit about teaching, and we know a little bit about where appraisal education has been, where it is, where it's going. So basically, I've got three questions for you today. And the first one is something that's near and dear to both of our hearts. And that is where appraisal education has been. And when I say appraisal education, I mean, of course, QE and CE. So we're not asking for a history of it because we don't want to go back that far. But from the standpoint of where it has been, what do you think have been the positives? What do you think have been the negatives?
As far as, let's go back, Tim, far enough to talk about when we got in the business. I remember I took my QE education primarily through the Appraisal Institute. I was on the commercial track at that point, gone to work for an MAI. And so my education came through going to classes live. I would fly across wherever to go to classes and attend them for a week at a time for my qualifying education. I remember sitting in one gentleman's office in Houston where I had a motel room, and I would go into his office during the day, and there was about half a dozen of us that were sitting in his office taking an income course that I will never forget. Probably one of the hardest courses I had taken at that point. And he did an excellent job of working one-on-one with us. We don't see that so much anymore, that one-on-one individual attention. I know you and I, when I started, it was all live education. That's the way we did it pretty much. Things had just kind of began to break into doing something that was more web-based. But primarily we were traveling, and, I've been to different parts of the country teaching appraisal CE hours, continuing education hours, over the last several years. And that's my favorite way to teach. I think it's a way to get to know people better. And I think I can meet the students' needs better because we're interacting back and forth. And of course, we've seen change. I remember in 2020, I had taught a 28-hour string that week up in Dallas. And March of 2020, the last day was always USPAP. And so we would finish at about 4:00. And about 4:00 in the afternoon, I get a call from my husband that there's no toilet paper to be found anywhere. And I'm like, what? That makes no sense. I'll get some on the way home. Well, COVID started and that just changed our world. I mean, we were sitting in a room of appraisers and we didn't know what was going to happen next. The company I was teaching for went, okay, this is our last live class. Well, now what do we do? Does that mean that appraisers don't have to do their CE hours anymore? Or what is that going to mean for us? And is that nationwide? Is that just Texas? I mean, it was a whole set of implications. And as you know, Tim, we scrambled to get things online so that our appraisers could continue to take the continuing education that they needed. And it was hit or miss for a little while as to how well we were doing with it. And then now that's just kind of become the mainstream. It's been interesting. I tried last summer to teach in Florida, a 28-hour string of classes, and they were not very well attended, all live in the manner that we have had used to do it. And because they were not very well attended, the company that I was doing the instruction for said, hey, I don't think we're going to do live education anymore. We're going to stick with the web-based stuff. And so that's what we do. The virtual thing is the next best thing, in my opinion, to live education. And a lot of people have come to like it. Those who were naysayers, I think at the first, have really accepted the manner in which we're being forced to teach. Now, this still, I don't believe there's anything that will ever take the place of live education. And that's why, as part of the board for the National Association of Appraisers, we do live education at our events, as does I'm the past president of the Association of Texas Appraisers. And we do live education at our events. And so we're getting ready to do 2 regional meetings. We'll do one in Houston and one in Dallas in the coming months. And I get the privilege of presenting at those. And that's my favorite, is actually to be able to do that. And I guess, taking advantage of technology, that's a smart thing for us to do in the educational space. I love the fact that when I do teach virtually, I always find out where my students are from, and I could be teaching someone that's from Alaska and Florida and Texas all at the same time. And that's really interesting to me, and to see the different reactions to different topics from across the country, because everything's not the same in Florida as it is in Texas, Tim. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yes, having lived in both states, yes, I do. Pam, let's back up a second. Now, you mentioned that you were in Dallas, you were in an appraiser's office in Houston. Excuse me, Houston. You were in an appraiser's office in Houston, and there were 6 of you, 7 of you, and you were getting some really serious one-on-one attention
Yes.
from what was probably because you were taking commercial classes, as somebody who had an MAI
Yes.
and somebody who had a number of years
Yes.
experience behind him. And
Yes.
not only was there a lot of academic learning going on, but there was a lot of one-on-one of personal experience to back that up.
Absolutely.
Basically, I've got 2 questions. Number 1, is that very hands-on method, that very hands-on model, one that we'll never see again? And number 2, in order to make education, well, let's be serious, financially feasible, and to put a lot of people in a Zoom class, and you and I have taught Zoom classes where we've had 100 people, and I've got to say this gently: has real estate appraisal education been dumbed down to account for the fact that we can't put 6 people in a room with a senior appraiser and have him or her, in effect, mentor us for a week?
Right. Mhm. I Well, to answer your question, Tim, let me see, is that gone? I hope not. I hope not. I hope we're still, and I see some of that through my mentorship. We're able to sit one-on-one with people, doing the mentorship through the state. Now it's for short periods of time, it could be as little as 3 hours, or sometimes it's as many as 8, but typically that's a one-on-one instruction. Us walking through, and I've seen you do this even at conferences, Tim, where you've an appraiser has pulled you aside and pulled out an appraisal report, and you're sitting there and you're going over it with that person to try to help them be better. So I don't think it's going to go away. It may not be as formal as it was then, but again, I think there's two things that we have to remember. One is qualifying education. In my opinion, heaven forbid that this get out from here, Tim, which it will, right?
Nobody listens to these things, Pam, so don't worry about it.
I don't think that you get the quality of qualifying education that you need in an audience of 100 people virtually. I really don't. I don't think people are comfortable with asking questions that in their mind may sound dumb, or I don't think that there's the feedback necessary. You get the 1 or 2 people who will always give you the feedback, but the vast majority of the class is not going to ask those questions in that kind of setting. And so my fear for qualifying education is that we've taken that away from a point where it was the one-on-one and being able to sit down with someone and really go over it, with the exception of, and you and I both know, the impact program that Melissa Bond put together. That is very much a one-on-one kind of education. Now they're still taking the courses, but that one-on-one training that they're getting as they're doing that has been a vast success. I was just looking at our statistics in the state of Texas about first-time test takers, for example, and the pass rate is very low. It's in the low 60 percentile. And Melissa, her first-time test takers, that ratio has been much higher. I forget exactly what the numbers were, but she's really only had 3 people out of the 17, I guess, that have had to take the test twice, and they've still passed it. We don't have that kind of record in Texas. And I think that is what we're talking about. If you're doing qualifying education, it's important that you're getting the basics, you're getting the principles. And I don't know that that can be accomplished as well in virtual education as it can in live. But how do you make that financially feasible? I don't know how much that gentleman got paid. I have no idea, to teach 6 of us in his office for a week. But I do know that I would go home. I would go to the hotel every night and study. That's how serious it was. That's all I did for the whole week.
Having taken the same classes, you didn't do much partying. But full disclosure, Pam and I are both involved with the MPAT program.
Yes.
We are both subject matter experts. We are both instructors, and we are paid for our time and talents.
Yes.
Let's Pam, let's go to the second portion of this question. Okay, today, now, appraisers still have to have, round numbers, 30 hours every 2 years. And that many times they don't take them until the 364th day of the second year. And so they're just sitting in classes, and as well as I do that as long as they don't make any noise and don't snore very loudly, they're going to get the same credit as those who actually participate and go there to learn.
Yeah.
Now, the situation today, and we're also under a great deal of political pressure to come to understand fair housing a regulation, something that we've always been subject to, but something that because it's a federal law, and we don't, we deal in individual houses, but we've not really paid any attention to. So we now have to take, depending on where you are, anywhere from 7 to 10 hours of fair housing education every renewal cycle. I think it's 4 hours in New York, and I think it's 7 hours in California. I don't remember, but it will be required in each state, but it will not be a constant across the states. Now, from a standpoint of education, how is it, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase. This is going to be in addition to the 30 hours we already have to have. So this just puts another layer of CE into the mix. But because it's CE, and again, you and I, and we're not making fun of anybody. It's just, we've sat in those classes. There are a number of folks who, how shall we say this gently, choose to go on mental vacation while they are in these classes. We'll just put it that way. So given that, is another 4 to 7 hours of a mental vacation really going to do anybody any good? Or is it just, we've got to bow to the political forces that be?
Sure. And just as a reminder, this is strictly Pam's opinion. It's no one else's at this point. I do like the letter that I saw that the chairman at the Texas Appraiser and Licensing Certification Board wrote about that additional hours. And her point was that asking an appraiser to take those additional hours in that particular topic was probably not as effective, let me say it that way, as sprinkling in that topic in every other class that we teach. And I agree with that. Don't just set aside and make it its own entity. It's like, let's go take a sales comparison approach. Let's go take an income. Let's go take a bias class. Don't make it its own entity, but factor those principles into our other courses across the board. I think that's a better approach. If you ask any appraiser, most appraisers, let me say it that way, are you biased? I would say absolutely not. Now, we know there are different kinds of bias, and sometimes we're biased and don't even realize that we are biased. So that's not the debate. Perception becomes reality. Perception becomes reality. If the public believes that appraisers are biased, then we have the duty, if we're going to be an appraiser and we're going to operate under USPAP, to promote the public trust by doing something to show that we are cooperating with a turn in the different direction. Not that we were ever biased. That's not an admission of guilt at all. Not that we were ever biased, but that we're willing to study the topic further. Does that mean another 7-hour class? I don't think so, in my opinion. I like the idea of putting it in with our other topics.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And yeah, we'll recognize that as your opinion, and we'll also recognize that you have a clue what you're talking about. So that opinion is going to carry a lot of weight. Let's move on to a tangential area for a moment. Now, the recently, and we're recording this in May of 2023. Recently, the Appraisal Standards Board chose to adopt the 5th exposure draft of USPAP, which contained significant, I don't want to say changes because that's not the right word, additions, significant additions to the ethics rule, all having to do with fair housing.
Right.
And there is nothing there now that wasn't there before. Now it's just in greater detail. And of course, we will have to cover that in the 7-hour update classes.
Sure.
And there's some
Mhm.
other things. The definition of appraiser was changed a little bit, and the definition of misleading has been removed, and
Right.
definition of personal inspection was cleared up. But the big one was the basically the adoption of the fourth section of the ethics rule, which has to do with discrimination in fair housing.
Right.
Now, from a standpoint of an appraiser complying with USPAP, from a standpoint of an appraiser staying out of trouble with the state board, what if anything? What if anything? Let me stress that condition. What if anything is an appraiser going to have to do so as not to find him or herself on the wrong end of that state appraisal board letter
Mhm.
relative to possible bias or discrimination?
Mhm. Mhm. I think, number one, and let's assume positive intent here. Let's assume I go out and I look at a house. Now, do I care who that owner is? If I am doing an appraisal and it's for a mortgage finance transaction, when I go out and I meet the homeowner, does that impact my perception of the house? Probably not in most cases, probably not. So I turn in my report though, and I note some things about that person in my report. Now, is there a possibility that I've got some discrimination or some bias going on? And again, it may be I get called down for I have 10 grandkids. So I get called down for using the wrong words that are no longer politically correct by my grandkids. You can't say that anymore. And I think that's what appraisers have to do. Think about what you're writing. Go to the Fannie Mae website. Read those key words that you need to leave out of your report and figure out another way to get across your point without using words that offend in any way, shape, or form. So I think it's more about learning to write and write well and be able to tell the story. If there's one thing I think we're really lacking in education, Tim, it's being able to write and write well. Um, Appraisers have gotten to the point that, let me say it in as few words as possible, and they're forgetting that they need to paint a picture with their words for the reader. And that picture needs to be careful to be perceived the way the writer intends it to be perceived. Not throwing in words that would lead the reader in their own mind to have a bias even. So you can lead someone to a bias just by the words that you use when your intent was never to be discriminatory at all. But because of the words that you're using, it has that impact. So go to that website and read, become very familiar with these are things I don't say in an appraisal report. I mean, I remember even when I started doing residential work, we were always putting in the census data and the reports. That was just part of what we did. Well, we don't do that anymore. And if you're not being educated on that particular aspect, you may want to take some additional education to make sure that you're not putting things in your report that could be perceived to be discriminatory in any way, shape, or form. I don't know if that answered your question, or if I just danced around it, Tim.
Pam, the third section, the third part of the question is, where do you see real estate appraisal education going? Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Do you see it becoming more difficult? Do you see it becoming more extensive? Do you see it becoming more hands-on? Like, excuse me, for example, you go to a CE class, a QE class, and you sit there for how many hours you have to sit there. And then you take an exam, which is basically, have you memorized the stuff that was in the class, and can you regurgitate it Can you remember it long enough to regurgitate it and then effectively forget it?
Right.
Or are we going to see education become more practical in that instead of saying, for example, what are the four components of highest and best use? The question would say, how do the four components of highest and best use impact exposure time, um, marketability, and market value?
Right. Right. I hope, my hope is that through things like Perea, for example, or practicum program of some sort, that we are going to see not just the ideological ideas placed in the head of future appraisers, but we are going to see the application of that. And you are 100% correct. You and I both know, even appraisers have been doing this for a long, long time. In almost every class, we talk highest and best use, we say, what are the four tests? And there's this silence. That should be something that people should rattle off their head. Just, I mean, that was praising 101, highest and best use. But to talk about those four tests and how they apply is even more important. If they can't name them, I'm not sure they know how to apply them. And that worries me. And I'm hoping that through some of the practicum programs, the Perea, that we will have truly a practical application of the real estate appraisal process.
Okay, we're getting toward the end. Quick question. Are we going to see more appraisers in the future? Are we going to see fewer appraisers in the future? Are we going to see more appraisers going into market niches that don't involve the GSEs? Stare deeply into your crystal ball and
Let me
share
get
with
it off the
us,
shelf.
pull it down and take a look at it. Yeah. Share with us where you think not only real estate education, but real estate appraisal is going.
Okay. I think the numbers don't lie. I spent a little time looking at some of the documents that are going to be handled in the upcoming Texas Appraiser and Licensing Certification Board meeting. I was going over their meeting agenda and looking at complaints that have been received and that kind of thing. And the numbers are saying that the number of trainees is down. And their rationale is because of the slowdown that we've seen in the business. And I think that's very true. I think I've heard a great deal of appraisers who have said, you know, to stay in this business, you're going to have to change some things. I'm not willing to do that. I've been doing it for 30, 40 years, and I like the way I'm doing it. And so I'm just going to sit here and wither on the vine. I've heard other appraisers who are younger, have more energy probably than some of the rest of us, who are willing to adapt, willing to become like certified general instead of certified residential at this particular point, and expand their base. So I think the profession in general, when I got into it many, many years ago, I walked down the hall. I was doing commercial property management. I had a tenant that was an appraiser, and I said, I'm tired of doing commercial property management. Real estate's all I know. How do I become an appraiser? He said, I'm glad you asked. Here's your desk. And I said, well, thank you very much. Now what do I do? I knew nothing about it. He said to me, I don't know how much longer there will be a need for real estate appraisers. He said that, and that's been many, many moons ago, decades ago. And it's been true every day since. Someone said, well, I don't know how much longer we're going to be around. And I think if you look at where we as appraisers can add value, it's where it takes a brain to think this thing through. Computer can't do the things that we as a human can do. I mean, to some extent, yeah, computers have come a long way, and there's some great technology out there that we need to avail ourselves of. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, I don't know that there will ever not be a need for quality real estate appraisers, people who have fine-honed skills in this profession. And it is a profession. It is a profession, and one that is noble. And I think we should strive for that, making ourselves be the best that we can be. And you don't get it by sleeping through classes. By the way, you've got to set your mindset that you're going to learn something if you're going to continue on in the profession.
Miss Pam, thank you. Now, if somebody needed to get a hold of you for whatever reason, how could they do that?
Sure. Well, you can reach me at p.teal.appraiser@gmail.com. You can also find me on the NAA website, National Association of Appraisers website, as well as the Association of Texas Appraisers website. And I don't mind giving you my phone number, 361-438-9053. Chances are when you call me, if you're not in my contact list, I will not answer. But if you leave me a message, I will call you back.
Well, that makes sense. That's how I work it. Pam, again, thank you. Want to extend my personal best to you and your husband, the artist. If you ever get to see Pam's husband's work, you should take the chance. It's quite beautiful. And
Thank you.
Pam, let's see, you're not the president of the ATA anymore, but you were mentioning the ATA is going to be having some meetings the remainder of this year. When are those?
Yes, we have one coming up in Houston. Let me think. The first weekend in June will be in Houston, and then the third weekend in June we will be in Dallas.
Okay.
And we've got 7 hours of CE there.
Okay, and are you going to be doing any speaking or teaching any upcoming classes?
I'm going to get to talk about the life of an appraisal. You know, what happens to the appraisal after you deliver it? Why did they order the product that they did? We're going to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit.
Is that going to be at the ATA meetings?
Yes.
Okay, and then are you going to be attending the either the Appraisal Expo or the Appraisal Summit in the fall?
I will be at the Appraisal Summit. I have a small presentation that I will do in conjunction with Heather Sullivan. We're going to talk about intended users. And then I will get to host one of the afternoon sessions. And I will chair the Board of Governors meeting too prior to that. So.
Okay, good deal. All right. Pam, again, we thank you. We appreciate your time, your expertise, your care, and your thought. And I look forward to the next time we get to shake hands, which will probably be in Las Vegas. So
there you go.
want to thank everybody for listening. Hit those like and subscribe buttons. And if you have a USPAP question, again, Pam is a USPAP instructor, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. So Pam, thanks. Appreciate it. And everybody who's watching, thank you. We appreciate that too. Bye-bye.
My privilege. Bye.